Are you doing enough to protect your business from the roller coaster of rapid tech changes and cyber threats? It can feel overwhelming, like you're drowning in jargon and confusing advice, especially when all you want is straightforward guidance you can trust. That's exactly why Solutions IT is here. Their team meets you where you are, offering clear explanations, regular check-ins, and a helping hand to keep you protected. From compliance issues to cybersecurity risks, they'll cut through the noise and make sense of it all. At Solutions IT, they're all about putting the human first. That means understanding your unique needs and speaking your language, so you can focus on growing your business without sweating the tech stuff. Are you ready to tackle your fears, get an assessment, or just talk it out? Give Solutions IT a call at 888-686-0696 or email help@solutionsit.net. They're here to support you every step of the way. Hey there, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and clearly you can hear in my voice I'm recovering from a cold. It seems to be going around everywhere, but thanks for joining us for today. I've got a great episode for you. Today's guest is Anne-Marie Anderson. She's a veteran broadcaster with over 35 years at ESPN and other major networks. But today we're here to talk about something that's even bigger than sports, which is Audacity. Her new book is called Cultivating Audacity, Dismantle Doubt and Let Yourself Win. This is a wake-up call for anybody waiting for the perfect time to go after what they want. And in this conversation today, Anne-Marie shares a deeply personal story that shaped her fearless approach to life and work. We break down the 4 major barriers that hold people back, which is fear, time, money, and self-doubt, and talk about how to push past them. Plus, she explains why Audacity isn't about being reckless, but it's about being bold, taking calculated risks, and it will lead us to growth personally and professionally. If you've ever found yourself stuck in procrastination like I have, or waiting for that right moment, or hesitating to take that big swing that you've always wanted to, whether it's personally or in your business, this conversation is definitely for you. If you get to the end of the conversation and you love this episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. It helps more people like you find the show. And if you're not subscribed yet, I hope you will take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and receive those episodes every Tuesday. And we hope you'll join us in transforming workplaces in a positive way. This show is brought to you by Xenium HR. Learn about Xenium's complete HR plus payroll, custom HR solutions, and learning and development programs at xeniumhr.com. All right, now let's get to the conversation with Anne-Marie Anderson, the author of Cultivating Audacity. Anne-Marie, it is such a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the show.
It is my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here, Brandon.
So we're recording this on January 2nd. By the time this releases, it'll probably be a few weeks after. But you just had a new book come out yesterday. It's called Cultivating Audacity, Dismantle Doubt and Let Yourself Win. You started off the introduction with a personal story. It was heartbreaking, but tell the story about Peter, if you will, and just how that transformed the way you looked about your life and how to live more audaciously.
Sure. People always ask, right? Like, what spurned this consciousness for you? And well, I've worked for ESPN for 35 years and a variety of other networks, but I began my career full-time at ESPN. And before that, I was an intern at a local station, as most television people are. And I interned for a really nice man named Peter Rogod, who was a local anchor in Denver. A couple years later, when I was already at ESPN, Peter got his dream job to be a SportsCenter anchor. And I was just so delighted for him. He was 37 years old, had just gotten married, super fit. Now he had his dream job. And on his 6th day in the SportsCenter, he came walking through past my desk, said hello, and the phone rang, and it was somebody from our old station, and I transferred it back to his desk, which was behind a partition. And a few minutes later, somebody came running down around the corner saying, "Does anybody know CPR? does anybody know CPR? And it was a moment where I knew CPR. I had been trained. And so I thought, yeah, I'll help out. I expected to find anybody but Peter there. The long story short of it is, I believe it was an aneurysm, but Peter died instantly right there on SportsCenter's floor. And I remember thinking in that moment that if you can be 37 and newly married and just starting your dream job and have it all ripped away in a moment, I was never going to wait for anything ever again. And I know you hear people say that sometimes, like, remember the moment. But I really decided I was done. Like, I went from that moment, started traveling Serengeti and Mount Everest Base Camp. And I love to travel, rafted dangerous rivers. And I applied it to my career too. I went to my boss and said, hey, I'd like to be, producing the Olympics in Barcelona. And that moment kind of changed everything for me. And it really led to audacity and the willingness to take risks.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is like, whatever that saying is, like, the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, but the next best time is today. And it reminds me of just living in the moment, but also just seizing for what you want, like going after what you want right now. Why wait?
Right. That's the big thing that I think a lot of people have problems. They wait till they're ready, right? I'll do it when I have more time, when I have more money, when I have all the qualifications. And ready never arrives. When never comes.
Talk about audacity. So that word, to me, I've heard a lot of people use it in a negative connotation, but maybe distinguish the difference between audacity, confidence, and what the difference between the two. Or maybe even give an example if you can.
Sure. Well, I think when you talk about a negative connotation, people think of somebody who is rude, perhaps, or disparaging. That's what I thought it was originally. When I grew up, my parents would say, you have the audacity to ask me that after. But when I looked it up, it is the willingness to take bold risks. Very simply put, audacity, audacious. My sister-in-law is Argentine, and she said in Argentina, audacity is a great word. Like, what do you mean it's negative in this country? And it's something that I believe in, because for me, taking bold risks was not second nature. So that's where the word cultivating comes in, right? Because you want to cultivate this ability to take bold risks. And it doesn't come naturally to most of us. And I think, Brandon, too, there's three components to it, if I will. There's the decision, right? The mindset of audacity, which is really just optimism. Like, why do you come out and play the second half of a basketball game when you're losing by 12? Because you think maybe if you get your offense together, you might win, right? So that's just the mindset. But you can have a mindset all day long and sit on the couch and nothing's going to happen. So the second component, of course, is audacious behavior, which is just an action. And when you talk about an example, it can be as simple as saying no to something that you don't want to do without explanation, without that trailing, no, I can't because, but just no. It's really uncomfortable, but it's an easy way to practice. And when you marry those two together, the mindset and the behavior, then you've got an identity, and you go from, what is Brandon doing, to, that's Brandon, he swings for the fences. And for me, that's a great place to live. And I think in all the interviews I've done, that's where a lot of success happens, is when people just keep swinging for the fences.
Totally.
And aren't worried about the outcome.
I mean, you see this so often in sports, right? And in all walks of life, like somebody so talented can only get you so far. It's really right. That mindset makes all the difference in the world. Maybe marginally, but that's what makes great from not so great.
Yeah, I think it was Kevin Durant that said hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard.
I love that. You mentioned the twin jailers are procrastination and self-doubt. And I think that's so probably like what we're talking about here is mindset. And when you procrastinate and self-doubt, that is all right here in your head. How did you personally break free of those? And maybe you still deal with those, but how can others do the same? Break free of these two things that are going to hold us back.
Okay, I love that you asked this, because in my view, there's four components, right? Four barriers that stand between most people and the thing they want to do: fear, time, money, and your inner critic. So when you're talking about self-doubt, inner critic, and the first thing I learned was to separate that voice that's always there, right, in the back of your head, from myself. I did this easily with my 12-year-old daughter, who one day I picked her up from school, and I said, hey, how was school? And she said, I'm stupid. I can't do math. And oh, by the way, I'm fat. And I was like, yo, wait, what just happened?
Time out.
Hello, want a snack? Kind of thing. But we had a conversation about, would you say that to anybody else? The same conversation we've all had with our kids. And the answer was no, of course. And I said, so if it's not Lena, that's my daughter's name, saying that, who is it? And so we named that voice. And I really recommend this for adults and everybody else. It is powerful when you take it away from you. So instead of Lena saying that, it's Jerry. That's the name she picked, Jerry. And when I hear her in the kitchen going, oh, I can't do this, I go, shut up, Jerry. Because I asked her what she wanted to say to that voice. And those are her words, shut up, Jerry. So I was like, okay, so that I support her by yelling that out to kind of take her out of that moment. So that's the first thing in terms of self-doubt. And then for procrastination that you asked about, we never think we have time, right, Brandon? Like, not now, but when I have more time, I'll do it for sure then. And of course, that never comes. And that's born out of something that I call the urgency fallacy, because our whole life seems urgent. I mean, you know this, you have kids. Like, can you sign this permission slip now? Can you do this expense report? Can you send this, answer this text, this call, whatever it is that you want to do? And we can get so caught up with urgent. And once all that's done, then we're going to do what's important. And that never arrives either because we're exhausted. So I recommend for procrastination, carving out blocks each day to do what's important. And to do that, you have to be able to define what's urgent and what's important because they're different. Urgent is something that can be ticked off your list easily, usually provides a nice sense of satisfaction, when you're done with that. Something that's important is not that way. It requires more thought and more skill. Something that's urgent has an impending deadline, due at this time. Something that's important may not have a deadline, but has consequences if it's not accomplished. For example, in writing a book, right? There's no deadline. I know people have written books for 7 years, but for me, it was important. So I would schedule time. And scheduling your time to be able to spend a few minutes, even if it's 15 or 20 minutes, toward what aligns with your values, vision, and goals changes everything.
Yeah. I love what you're saying. And I feel like you're calling me out a little bit because I'm like, the procrastination thing is a big problem for me. Before we started recording, you're like, why haven't you wrote a book? It's largely due to the procrastination. It's like I know I want to at some point, but the urgency of the day-to-day stuff, like you said, the permission slips and kids, my daughter does competitive dance and my son does basketball. And it's like, it just feels like a lot when you pile on personal work. And then it's like, when am I ever going to get to it? Well, you got to prioritize it. You got to have a vision board. You got to do all these things and say, where do I want to go? What do I got to do today to get there? And I imagine that throughout your life, even after the moment that happened with Peter at ESPN, like I'm sure you had moments of procrastination and self-doubt. How did you get through that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not going to let you off the hook right now for what you were going to do. Let me tell you this. I have an example of another father who wanted to do something different and couldn't find the time. This man wanted to become a realtor. He wanted to become a real estate agent, have to pass a test there. And so when we talked, I said, okay, so why are you not doing it? And he goes, well, you have to pass the test. Okay, so have you taken the test? No, why not? Well, because I haven't had time to study and I'm afraid I'm going to fail the test. And I said, well, have you studied at all? Yeah, I've studied some. Okay, here's step number 1. People just cringe at first when I say this. Go fail first. If that's what you're afraid of, go fail first. So I told him, go take the test. There's no limit to how many times you can take the test. It's $60. So he went, took the test. Because he didn't have enough knowledge, he failed. And he survived that. So I was like, okay, so that's done. You're afraid you're going to fail. Now you've already done that. What's next? And it was finding the time. And you can do it any different way. He worked with his wife. They had 2 little girls that he did 30 minutes. He needed an hour a day. He did 30 minutes in the morning before they get up. We can usually do something like that. And then he did 30 minutes during bath time. So he had little kids. So what he worked out with his wife was, I'll help you get the kids in the bath. You take care of the entire bath. I'm going to lock myself away. No phone, no nothing for 30 minutes. I'll be back out to be able to do book in bed. And his wife, being a main supporter of his, was able to work that out. He did that for a few months, passed the test, and now he has the career that he wanted and the freedom that he wanted.
Incredible. Yeah. So he had a vision for what he wanted and then clearly put a plan together to schedule time in every single day because it was important, right? Like he made the time for it. And I need to do the same. If I want to write a book, I need to do the same, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. So a lot of us have heard of glass ceilings, like holding us back, or like we can't get to that limit. You talk about sticky floors, though. That was the first time I've ever heard that before. Define that, like just maybe an example.
Yeah, well, it's sticky floor. If you just picture the image, right? I mean, we're not hitting the glass ceiling. We're stuck to the floor, waiting till we have all the qualifications, waiting till the right time. I mean, an easy example of that is when you see a job listing and you think, oh man, I'd love that. And you read the qualifications and you're like, well, I'm not qualified. I don't have that. And then somebody who's less qualified than you gets the job. And you're like, yeah, like, how did that happen?
You didn't apply.
Right. That person was audacious. And maybe, you know, that person applied with 50% of the qualifications and didn't get the job, but went back at 65% of the qualifications, still didn't get the job. But when they go back at 85% of the qualifications, and maybe that's when you go in too, to apply, that you both have 85% of the qualifications. Well, who's going to get that job? That person, because they've already seen the interview process, they have face-to-face interaction, they know what's coming, and the person hiring has seen them add skills. You've been adding them too, but been doing that in the dark. And so the sticky floor has kept you waiting until it felt like the right time instead of just jumping, leaping, and seeing what happens. I think generally we are just too attached to the outcome in order to do the action. And once you release yourself from the outcome, whatever happens, happens, and I'll survive that, then things get a lot easier.
So you wrote an entire book about Audacity. Why do you think that Audacity is like so critical to success and probably overlooked by a lot of people?
Because I think that we're used to comfort and staying in our comfort zone, and Audacity is absolutely about being uncomfortable at times. You know, it was interesting, Brandon, when we were doing the subtitle of the book, which is Dismantle Doubt and Let Yourself Win. Originally, it was Dismantle Doubt and Take Bold Risks. The word risks, when we tested it, freaked people out. Just the word risk. I was like, you know. But I think that we need it because we live within our own limitations. If you're completely content with your life, then go for it. That's awesome. I have an assessment in the back of the book that talks about your professional and career. It talks about your relationships, and it talks about your health and fitness. And you can take all those separately and then together. If all three of those areas are working for you, that's wonderful. I took my own assessment after I did it, and my relationships were down because my career was great, killing it, my health and fitness, but I wasn't nurturing my friendships enough. I wasn't spending enough time in my relationships. So by becoming aware of that, you can make these little shifts. Why don't people do it? Because they're afraid of what could happen instead of what might happen in a positive way.
You talked about biggest barriers to making an audacious move. There's 4 different barriers. What are those barriers?
Fear of failure, rejection, embarrassment, exposure, judgment, whatever. Time, not having enough of it, looking for the right time. Money is always a big barrier for people. And then your inner critic. Those 4 things can get between you and the thing you want to do. And I suggest kind of leaning into them because none of them will go away. You're not going to overcome fear and never be afraid again. You're going to learn to make friends with fear and recalibrate your relationship with rejection. That's when the magic starts to happen, is when you build a relationship with each of those barriers.
I'm sure you came up with those based on your experience. And being that you're an ESPN broadcaster, I'm sure there was a time where going on camera was probably pretty tough, and maybe you were fearful of it. How did you overcome that? Because I'm sure, unless you were just a young kid thinking, I want to be on camera, I'm sure you had some fear along the way. Like what? How did you?
Oh my gosh, terror, not fear, terror. Because I was a producer at ESPN at first. So I had established my career as a producer, producing Olympic Games, heavyweight title fights, NBA playoffs. Like I had the big assignments, worked at the Super Bowl. So when I wanted to go on air, I wasn't a young spring chicken. I was 30 something and already had this established career. So I kind of went backdoor, able to get a job in a small market. It was called ESPN Regional Television in the Mountain West. as a college football sideline reporter. But before I was ever on camera there, one of our regular reporters at ESPN had a conflict. So I ended up getting assigned her games, which were on ESPN2 and main ESPN. And so my first time ever on television was college football opening weekend, ESPN2, which was in 78 million homes. I'd never been on air. I was absolutely sick to my stomach outside the stadium, crying like any professional reporter, like literally sobbing outside the stadium in Blacksburg, Virginia, to my then husband, who was like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? People like to ask that. And this is a real key component, I feel, for people cultivating audacity, especially if you're working with fear, to catastrophize it to the nth degree. See what is the absolute worst thing that can happen, because it's probably not going to go there. So I said to him, you want to know what could happen? Oh, I'll tell you. Not only will I be so bad on air that I'll never, ever get another on-air assignment, but I will lose my producing job too, because everybody I produced for will never take my advice again. And then I could lose my entire television career. And if I lose my television career, I will be so miserable, because this is all I've ever wanted to do. You will have no choice but to leave me, because I won't be able to be a good mother to our children, who haven't even been born yet, by the way. And without a family, without a career, I will die destitute and alone.
That's deep and dark.
And he was like, wow, you went there. And I'm like, oh yeah, I went there. Yeah. Now, of course, did I believe that? No. But that's what I mean by catastrophizing it. You're not going to win an Emmy your first time on the air. You're probably not going to blow up your life and die destitute and alone. Once you can see the ridiculousness of your catastrophe, that really helps. And the second part in getting over fear, Brandon, is that I was afraid that I was going to be bad on air, that I would be exposed as being bad on air, that I'd be embarrassed, I'd be judged. So I went on air, and I was bad on air. I was exposed. I was embarrassed. There were some people who judged me, and I survived. I survived. And the next week, I was on air again. And the only thing that was better about the second time was that it wasn't the first time. I was still bad. And each time I got up and did it again, I became a little bit desensitized to that fear and that potential outcome, and could work on the data. And this is what I tell people, it's not really failure, data that's coming in that will help you direct towards your goal. For me, it was some of the things I was saying on air, my cadence, my tone of voice. For somebody else, it may be a rejection as you start your business in this area that moves you in a different direction.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, your vantage point is unique. I mean, live TV is crazy. You get a constant feedback loop. You can see yourself. For others, it's like just inner critic stuff, and they probably don't quite have the feedback loop that you have. I remember when Tom Brady went on his first week in the NFL broadcast booth, and people were hammering him. But he's the GOAT. He's the GOAT. You know, he's probably going to just brush off that feedback, and he will get better. I'm sure he's getting better every single week, just like you were on live TV.
Let me ask you this. When they were criticizing him and just tearing down Brady, where were they when they were doing that? Yeah.
Oh, behind the computer.
They were on the couch in their mother's basement eating chips. You know what I mean? Like, he's out there risking it, and he had a lot to lose, right? And that is the difference. Like, keep in mind, my friend Laura Gassner-Otting always says, don't give a vote to somebody who shouldn't even have a voice. And that's a great...
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're centered with like where you're going, like you know what your vision is and you and your mission. And as long as you keep that and you block out the noise, then you should be fine. And that's probably why you were so successful. And you have 3 Emmys sitting behind you right now, is because you were able to silence the critics and probably work on your inner critic.
And ignore it. And I think one of the things I come across as I talk about this book and talk with different people is they were like, well, I know what it is I want to do. It just isn't this. There's some exercises in the book that help you narrow that down. A lot of people are familiar with the Japanese term ikigai, where it's centered around 4 questions. You know, what are you good at? What do you love? What does the world need? And what can you be paid for? Mine goes a little deeper than that in terms of a funnel, because it's not just one thing, but it's a similar concept. When you start looking at those questions in depth, not just one thing, then you'll start to find how you want to spend your time. I always tell people, you know, when I ask, what do you want to do with your life? When I'm speaking to like college graduates, and they yell out jobs. And I say, is that all you want, is to work? I asked you about your life and you gave me a bunch of jobs. What do you want to do with your life? What do you want it to look like? How do you want your free time to be spent? And something will reveal itself to you when you start doing the exercise of figuring out what is it that really makes me happy and I enjoy and I'm good at.
Obviously, you've probably read a book on Ikigai. I think I read a book about that as well. And I'm like, how did you start to incorporate those into some of your daily life and kind of process some of this stuff so you were very clear on what you wanted? I'm sure you got to build your day, or whether it's a monthly or quarterly strategy with like really thinking in terms of what you want. But how did you do it?
For me, it all goes back to the story I told you at the beginning with Peter. And, just not knowing how much time we had because of the experience I had trying to resuscitate him. I did CPR and, it didn't work. I have been keenly aware of doing whatever it is that I want to do now, that I want to try now, because I don't know how much time there is after that. And that, becomes asking yourself questions. I do a real check-in with myself all the time. Am I happy about this? Am I happy about that? At ESPN, which is the greatest job in the world as far as I'm concerned, I loved it when I was a producer there. I didn't love living in Connecticut and shoveling snow. So when I started to feel that, and this was after Peter passed, I went to my boss and said, hey, I'd like to be LA bureau producer. And he said, well, we already have an LA bureau producer. And I was like, yeah, I know, man. That's why this is so awkward. And we talked for a bit, and I said, I really think I need to go on my own and do that. And he called me impatient. I'm like, you're totally right. How many weeks do you need?
The audacity of you, Anne Marie.
Right? I mean, it totally is. But I just, I said, okay, I'll give you 3 weeks or whatever it was he needed. And I packed up and drove across country, not knowing what I was going to do, but knew that I was not going to shovel snow. Like, that's the only thing I knew. Moving to the beach. And when I got here to LA, where I still live today, ESPN hired me for a couple of little things here and there. And by the end of the year, they had hired me back at double my salary. Amazing. And it was because I'd made a decision not based on money. I made a decision based on my life and what I wanted it to look like.
You sharing that story of like, out to LA, it reminds me of when you're talking about reckless risks versus worth it risks. On the surface, I could say maybe that was reckless, but you were probably thinking, no, that was a worth it risk. Maybe talk about the differences and how about risks in general.
Sure. That could be a reckless risk if you didn't have any money saved, if you have a family that you're trying to support, right? Those kinds of barriers. That's why you have to assess something that's reckless from something that is worth it. And, for me, I can't do that now, right? I can't just leave and go do something. I have 3 children and a house to support, and my ex-husband and I parent together. Like, you can't just do that. But at 26, how old I was then, and I had a savings, it qualifies as worth it. So again, when you're considering doing something, look at the possible outcomes. Sickens me if somebody's putting all their money, this is going to be a big idea and it's going to be great, and put all your money there. That's reckless. That's reckless. But something that's well thought out, studied, where you've got a support group, where you've got a safety net in terms of the basics. I don't mean a safety net like a plan B. I don't believe in plan B because it's usually easier than plan A. But a safety net of like, will I be homeless? Do I have money to eat? Will I be able to do the things that are necessary for me? Then it might just be worth it.
You had something really powerful in the book about like asking people to compare their 2 lives, one that they're living and the one that they want. What kind of exercise is this? How simple could you make it? See value in this? What can we gain from it, essentially?
Well, daydreaming, right? We all daydreamed as kids, and I think we all daydream still right now. This is what I would call conscious daydreaming, where you are thinking, okay, here's what my day looks like right now. Start to finish, whatever it is. If you like the space you're working in, the city you're working in, the relationship you're in, the work that you're doing. And then, well, if you could change something about it, what would you change? What would that life People exercise going around now in Chat GPT, which is after I wrote the book, but about putting in your dream life, and you say to Chat GPT, please show me describe a typical day in my dream life where I am, a best-selling author, spending half my year overseas, whatever it is, and Chat GPT will give it to you. So even after I wrote the book, you've got to cheat to start helping you figure out comparing your two lives. I didn't intend that when I wrote it, but it's a great way. And it allows you to see what could be, what might it feel like. And again, I believe in taking time. I do that at night every time, just kind of, some people call it manifesting. For me, it's meditating about like what I want to happen next, that will make me feel. Again, I never make decisions from anything other than like how it affects my life and how I feel. I don't make decisions based on money. I don't make decisions based on relation or anything like that. It's always about like, what am I contributing to the world? How do I feel about it?
You bring up in the book, I think it's towards the end, a concept of FOSS, fear of staying the same. I have a fear of staying the same. It motivates me because I want to just keep getting better every single day. But, for somebody who is fearful, how do they take this concept of like fear of staying the same? Like, how do they get unstuck essentially?
Sure. Well, my first question to somebody who says, they don't have that there is, are you happy right now? Right? Because if you're happy right now, go for it. It's great. And then just reevaluate later on. But chances are, if you're listening to this going, or reading the book or whatever, there's something you'd like to change. Staying the same only ensures one thing, and it's not safety. Staying the same ensures that there's no growth possible. And so in order to do anything different, you have to be able to try and experiment. And so for me, the fear of staying the same means I'll never grow. So again, for people that have this fear of changing, let me just ask, like, what is it that you would like to change? What's the cost if you don't? What's the cost? If you don't change, you will forever be unhappy in this relationship, this job, this body, if it's a health thing. Cost if you don't change it.
Individuals, this is at the individual level, but I think about businesses too. It's like if businesses don't grow, they're dying and they become less relevant in a world that's changing so rapidly, especially the last few years. And I imagine it's the same per person. If they're not growing, they're dying. Like that's probably more extreme, but if they're not working on their body's slowly dying and better. And there's a ton of risks with not staying the same. There's just so much downside to it. So I love what you're saying about that.
Yeah, I recently spoke at a human resources conference, a big conference in Denver. And what we talked about was enabling this idea of risk-taking in your employees if you're leading. Reckless versus worth it, right? Very important in business. But it's about not shooting down somebody who's got some different ideas. I call this weaving individuality into a powerful group culture. It's really important these days where people are working from home more, the ability to weave things in and take people's strengths. And I think Audacity can be a big part of that, because if somebody says, hey, here's an idea, whatever, and it doesn't quite work, you can go back to, well, okay, I like the thought there. What if we do this? Allowing your employees, your people to build upon each other is really freeing if they're not afraid of being shot down. And so encouraging that kind of audacity within the workplace can lead to terrific innovation.
Word, maybe some action items, but I wanted to point out for listeners, the back of the book, you've got the audacious assessment, which you mentioned. It's a very, very good and thorough assessment. And then there's club questions, which I love because you could take this with your team, share ideas. I just love anything that like you're basically giving people questions to engage in thoughtful dialogue. So the book is awesome. You've got a lot of great resources in there. But what's like one parting thought that you want to leave people with, maybe an action item, and then how can people connect with you?
Sure. The parting thought is this, and it has to do really with those questions in the back, is that nobody does this alone. And what you need is a front row. what I call a front row. And these are the people that are going to push you, challenge you, lift you up, ask you questions, hold you accountable. Your front row is probably not your mom. It's probably not your best friend, because they want you to stay safe. They don't want to see you hurt. It may be people who are already where you want to go, some mentors, some people that are doing big things in their own life in different areas where you'll challenge. But when you literally use that term and say, Brandon, I am writing a book right now on Audacity. I intend to finish it this year. Will you be in my front row? Now I have engaged us in a social connection, and you have a role in my life. At that point, then you feel like an obligation really to check in and see how things are. And it goes both ways in terms of checking in on you. So I think cultivating a front row is really important. It helps you block out all the people on their mother's couch on social media doing things. If you've got your front row of people that you can check in with, that's all you need. So my advice would be, don't try to do it alone. That's why I put the questions in the back, so that people could have that dialogue.
I love that. What's the best way to connect with you, Anne-Marie?
Site is annemarieanderson.com. There's an E on the end of Anne. You can reach me there. Of course, I'm on Instagram as well. You can find me at Cultivating, Audacity. And anybody that does buy the book and writes a review on Amazon, send me through one of those channels a screenshot of the review, and I will send you a bookmark that I designed only for people who leave the review to with a little audacious quote on it to kind of brighten your day.
My guest today has been Anne-Marie Anderson, the author of Cultivating Audacity, Dismantle Doubt, and Let Yourself Win. Congratulations on the book release. I'll be rooting for you. Thanks for coming on, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Brandon.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.